Good morning, everyone. I'm Fenwick Huss, Dean of the Zicklin School of Business, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Joining me from the Dean's office is Gwen Webb, Associate Dean for Executive Education, who will moderate the question and answer period. We're delighted to have with us today Ken Bouyer, Director of Inclusiveness Recruitment at E&Y, and Ken is joined by Paquita Davis-Friday, our Senior Associate Dean in the Zicklin School. She is also co-chair of the school's DEI Task Force. Leading our conversation is, of course, Larry Zicklin, former chairman of Neuberger Berman. He's our school alum and benefactor, and he also co-chairs with Paquita the DEI Task Force within the school. I'm also proud to say that Larry teaches in our undergraduate honors program as well. Welcome, everyone. Larry.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Fenwick. Ken, welcome. And let me begin by asking you what you're attempting to do at Ernst & Young, which we'll now refer to as E&Y, and how were you chosen for the job? Why you?
Larry, thank you so much. First of all, great to be with everyone this morning. I so appreciate the invitation to come and speak and share some insight and learn some things as well. So Larry, great to be with you and the team. Yeah, I think for me, a little history for me. I've been with EY now for a little over 30 years, Larry. I know I don't look a day over 50 years at the firm, but it's only been 30, a little over 30. And actually, I'm an audit guy by background, right? So went to Manhattan College, come to the business school, started with the firm in the assurance practice, and spent some years in our consulting practice as well before being tapped to lead our D&I recruiting efforts for the firm. Why me? It's a great question. I still, after 10 years of being in this role, wonder the same. But I think why me, as I reflect on it, Larry, is I literally have grown up in the firm. I happen to be a person of color, so I was with the firm and working in the audit practice in 1990 when I started in our New York office, before there was any such diversity initiative going on at all. And so I'd say I have experienced the life cycle of the firm in corporate America as an African American, and experiences were really eye-opening in some regard. And so I think I was tapped because I had a lot of passion. And really, as I think about it now, I really want to change the makeup of the firm and be an integral part of how we move going forward. So in a nutshell, Larry, I think that was it.
And how would you define potential success at E&Y? If you really did a great job and it worked, how would you know it?
Yeah, Larry, good question. You know how I'd know it, Larry? I'd no longer be in this role. I'd work myself out of a role if we had equity and kind of parity across the firm from an ethnicity and a gender perspective at all levels. So I know I'm successful when I'm no longer in this role, maybe teaching somewhere. So that's how I think.
Baruch.
I would. So I think that is it. But I think over the short run, Larry, it's, frankly, I'm very focused on the data. So looking at our data to really drive the efforts of the firm and investments we're making from a diversity standpoint. So incremental progress, because people always reference this DEI as a journey. And I understand completely what is meant by that, because it really is a journey. It takes a lot of consistency, a lot of effort, but at times it's incremental progress. And I think you have to be okay with that, as long as you continue to move the quote unquote needle in your respective initiatives, Larry. I think that's consistent progress there.
How long have you been on this task?
As a firm, more than 25 years, Larry. We started in the early 90s. Phil Laskaway was our chairman at the time, who really got us moving down the road on it. And a quick story, I think, on how this got started. Phil was, in New York, married. His wife had worked for an advertising company in New York. And at one point, she was pregnant and went to her boss, to her organization, and said, "I've got great news, Mr. Boss," whoever he was, "I am pregnant." And the response that she'd gotten from this company and her particular manager was, "Hey, that's great. Why don't you pack your office and you can leave now?" I mean, just think about that for a second. That was his response to her wonderful news of being pregnant. And essentially that's what she did. And of course, she comes back and she shares with Phil what just happened with her at her organization. And I think it caused Phil to pause and reflect and say, what would happen at Ernst & Young at that time if one of our colleagues had come and shared that great news? How would we respond? And then I think that really began the start of the firm's diversity focus, Larry. And so it's in the early 90s, again, over 25 years of focus here. And we've been unrelenting in our commitment to DEI.
Given all the other needs of E&Y, how do you prioritize DEI among all the objectives that the firm hopes to achieve over the next few years?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say for us, and I'd say for those of you who are listening, and whether you're representing part of a school or an organization, you have strategic priorities, and DEI is a strategic priority for the firm, Larry. So the good news is we've got resources, a firm of 300,000 people and 37 or so billion in revenue. We have to do a lot of things, but we have strategic priorities, as most orgs do. DEI is one of those priorities. So we have to balance, and that's part of the reason why myself, I've got a team of 10 folks specifically dedicated to talent acquisition. We've extended a number of recruiters around the country that we work with. So we invest heavily, Larry, with dedicated resources to make sure that this continues to be priority for the firm. So we do a lot of things. Obviously, serving clients is number one, and we do that extremely well. But we also know we've got to do things like invest in DEI, like invest in the communities that we live, that we work, and we manage those things fairly well across the board.
Who do you report to on this process?
I have the vice chair of talent for the firm is the person that I report to, and she ultimately reports to the CEO.
Oh, and is this DEI effort, is this part of regular management meetings? Is this an agenda item when management gets together or whatever forum they get together?
It is, Larry. And that's, that has been like a wonderful change and evolution to see within the firm. Not only is it a standing agenda item at the board, in fact, the board's meeting this week, and I had to provide some information. So it's a standing item, but any all hands calls that we have with the firm, most communications that go out, there is some aspect of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it is part of our fabric. And I think that has been one of the key to success for us. And hey, by the way, we haven't figured this out, so I want to be clear. We do great things, but we can do better. There's no question. But within the fabric of the firm, when I think about our values, right? So we, like all of us, we have a certain amount of values in your organization, but inclusiveness is part of our values. We have the board signed the DEI statement. And so it's a constant discussion at the board level and throughout the firm. And I get a chance to be a part of all that, which is pretty phenomenal.
And are you confident that there's a buy-in, not only at the management level, which there obviously is, but at the partner level all over the country and all over the world? I'm assuming you're global. Yeah,
no, Larry, you're right. So here's how I would answer that question. I would say our firm is, we're a reflection of the greatness of not just the country, but the world. And we have people with very different points of view from all walks of life here. There's no question as part of the fabric. There's no question from a leadership perspective that we are committed. And I'd like to think, 99% of our partners that they're pretty committed in the focus and effort. But the reality is, we have to continue to work internally. And I think getting people to understand and appreciate and value difference is a journey that everyone has to be on. And you're going to have people who have a different level of appreciation, understanding. They may be committed to it, but maybe not, Larry, sure what to do. So I think there's a constant education component that's required in helping, a firm of our side of 300,000. I wish I could say definitively every single person, Larry, has bought in and they get it and they're moving the needle and they're doing. Not the case, right? So that's why we've got to have continued education, communications, and messaging to help people. Because I do think, Larry, in my view, I describe it as the following. I think there are people who are, I'll call them the frozen middle. That's a term that gets used a lot. So within any organization, even at a university level, I think like generally the leaders and the top of the house, frankly, they get it. There's a good number of people at the grassroots that get diversity, equity, inclusion, why it's important. But there's a number of people in the middle who maybe understand it, but again, are frozen because they're not sure what quite to do, right? They'll attend a meeting, they'll maybe attend a discussion just like this, but go back to their audit client or go back to their engagement or to their project and may never change his behavior. So that's why consistency is important, but tackling the frozen middle. Again, they've got great intentions, I believe, but they're just not sure what to do. And let's face it, the world that we live in, there are people who are fearful, right, to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. And so there's a constant education needed of that frozen middle. And that's what, as a firm, we continue to try to tackle as well.
Your lifeblood being a service provider has to be the talent that comes out of universities all around the world. Are you finding enough talent to hire using DEI criteria?
So the short answer is no, right? I mean, we always want to do more. It's interesting when I just looked at our numbers yesterday. In fact, for this board meeting this week, we've had the best year ever from an entry-level recruiting for minorities, right? And we define minorities as Pan-Asian, Black, Latinx, and Native American. I mean, 45% of our campus hires were minority. That's the best we've ever done in this firm. So from that perspective, I'm pleased, but I'm never satisfied, right? I always think we can do more. Frankly, I think Larry, the issue is really around, we've got to build pipeline into our profession, into the professional services world. We just don't have enough underrepresented minorities who consider us or think about us. So there's constant education needed to increase the pipeline. But relatively speaking, Larry, we've done okay from an entry level hiring. And you're talking about a firm, we're hiring 14, campus 9,000 people, but all in the US, probably closer to 16,000 when you add our experienced hires. So we're talking big numbers here.
And Ken, have you started to look at processes that the firm has in place for hiring to help improve that recruitment of underrepresented?
Absolutely. It's interesting. This past year, I think for all of us, I'll call it post George Floyd and kind of the reckoning there. So many organizations took another look, a pause maybe, I think, on our DEI efforts. Many organizations started the journey recently, right, because of what they've seen. For an organization like us, we had a pause and we said, let's take a look at what we're doing. Let's challenge some of the initiatives. Let's challenge our processes. And one of the things we did throughout that was we did a deep dive of all I'll call it our internal processes, recruiting, performance management, promotion process. And we looked at it through a D&I lens. We looked to see and ask the question, where might bias exist in some of these processes? And in fact, we engaged our people advisory services group internally to do a deep dive. And it was actually a great experience because we were part of it, from the recruiting side. They had some really good recommendations and things that we need to do maybe differently, but constantly challenging your processes and looking at it through a diversity lens, I think is really healthy to do, because oftentimes you're not sure, right? People talk about unconscious bias all the time. You're not even sure where the bias may exist. So having someone come in and take a look and give recommendations, and that's what we did internally for all of our internal processes. And now we're in the midst of following up on some of the recommendations, making a few changes and some tweaks to our processes in an effort to try to get better. Because this is about getting better. There's no one perfect in the DEI space, no one. But if you recognize that, and you have to understand and ask yourself, what can you do to get better, just about every day? And that is one of the things I'm incredibly proud of about EY. We're trying to get better all the time. And again, we're not perfect at this, and I'll be the first to admit it. But what I know is we're unrelenting, we're focused, and we're constantly trying to get better. So yeah, we did a deep dive into our internal processes. Thanks for that.
When you look back 10 or 15 years to where you used to recruit from, I'm assuming that most of your recruiting comes at colleges and universities for the young recruits. Are you now fishing in different waters than you used to fishing?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, again, 9,000 folks. So we recruit at the entry level from universities across the country. Fishing in a different pond in this way, Larry, we're heavily involved now in the community college circles, where traditionally that had not been a source for us, but now we've been engaged at the community college level in a very different way. So yeah, that's a different source, if you will, for us. The other thing that we're doing, although it's a longer play, and we've been investing in high school initiatives, and again, try to raise awareness for high school students around the opportunities in the profession. And as they think about going to college and thinking about majoring in something, we want to say, hey, here's another consideration. I know, like for me, where I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, mom would always preach to me, become a doctor or a lawyer, right? That was the thing. And coming from where I grew up, that was quote unquote success. Mom never talked about being an accountant because we didn't have a lot of folks in our area and neighborhood who were accountants. So to the extent we can raise awareness, increase the pipeline at the high school level, community college level has been a really good source for us. And then we just expanded, I'll say, our reach, Larry. We were fairly focused on probably a few hundred schools to recruit talent into the firm traditionally. Now we're going to move to what I'll call an open source model. So any person and any student anywhere in the world can literally go to ey.com. And those of you, here's a shameless plug, go to ey.com and check us out. But you can go to ey.com and they'll be able to apply directly online for an entry-level position, which will be brand new. So that will allow us to really fish in any and every available pond that's out there.
I'm really impressed that you go to high schools to try to make them aware of what a career in accounting might look like.
Thank you. Thank you.
How diverse is your recruiting team?
My team is incredibly diverse, but the overall team, that's an area where when you talk about looking at processes, back to the question, that's an area we have to improve, right? Overall, from a recruiting standpoint, we need greater diversity we've got a huge recruiting group. I mean, hundreds of recruiters. So we're constantly looking at how do we increase diversity there. So anyone on the line who is interested in talent acquisition and working, please let us know. We do have some opportunities and we're looking for recruiters. So my team personally, very diverse. We're more broadly from the overall recruiting, Larry, we're certainly looking to increase diversity there as well.
Paquita chairs our DEI group. And one of the things we learned in our surveys, excuse me, is that students, in your case, recruits, like to see people who look like themselves when they join a firm or apply to a college. So that's critical. Or it seems to be critical. Are you able to retain much of this minority talent that you hire?
Yeah, no, and by the way, I agree with your comment. Certainly anyone and everyone, as they go through a recruiting process or work with an organization, seeing folks that look like them at leadership levels or higher ranks, if you will, that is really important. And so clearly for us, that's been a big focus. And I would tell you, when I first started with the firm in 1990, I did not see a ton of people that looked like me at all. In fact, that was an early challenge for me, Larry, as I thought about my career and asking myself, could I be successful at EY long term, and could I quote unquote make it? But fortunately, I had some wonderful mentors, and frankly, Larry, mentors who looked just like you, who took an interest in me, who really helped me, who guided me along the way, and said, Ken, irrespective of the color or what you see and don't see, we know you have what it takes to be successful here, and we'll let us help you get there. I mean, those words are important. So mentoring and coaching are critically important. At times, they're going to come from people who don't look like you, right? I mentor a number of folks who don't look like me. But what matters is the interest you take in individuals, the investment and the commitment you have in their career. And so we have to stress that. I think there's another question, part of your question, Larry.
Of maintaining this minority
retention.
hire, can you retain them?
Yeah, hey, Larry, that is our struggle, man. We do such a great job of bringing diverse talent into the firm. And as they start with the firm, it's a tough environment, number one. And because so many companies right now have such a focus on diversifying their respective companies and organizations, we tend to be, I'll call it a leadership development training program for many companies, who will come in and tap on and reach out to a lot of our diverse talent, offering them tremendous opportunities, and many leave that way, right? So retention continues to be an area of focus for us from that standpoint. And in the environment, man, we work hard like a lot of places, and I think just recognizing the work that we do how challenging it can be. The environment at times is really challenging. So we continue to work at that. But again, our people are highly sought after, right? We always say we try to recruit the kind of the best folks to be within the profession, certainly at EY. And we know the nature of it is that there are going to be organizations who say, yep, Ken Bouyer is talented. How do we recruit Ken to go work for us or be a part of what we do? And that's a big challenge for us, Larry, from the retention standpoint.
I want to get to what I think may be a sensitive subject. You talk about hiring the best people you can hire, which everybody wants to do. How do you weigh minority candidates, or do you weigh them differently? When we hire at Baruch, when we hire faculty at Baruch, we're always hiring people that can provide great research, great teaching, great service to the school. But I'm not so sure we count in their status as minorities as something to be weighted. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I agree. It's not that it's a touchy subject, at least from my side, Larry. It's certainly a sensitive one in this way. I actually, I'll say personally, I get very, I'll just say annoyed when I hear people think or speculate or make assumptions that you are reducing, quote unquote, your quality if you're trying to hire diverse individuals. I can very unequivocally speak to the fact that EY, that is not the case. If you get an opportunity with EY, you went through the exact same process. We're looking at your transcript. You're going to go through the interview process, the video interview, gamification process, AI look, and we're going to make an assessment based on your quality, skills, et cetera, et cetera. And so the color of your skin or the fact that you're a woman doesn't give you additional weight to get in. What we try to do is focus differentially investing on increasing pipeline, right? So we try to get people to apply. But once you apply, again, I don't care who you are, what color you are, what you look like, you've got to go through the same process and hurdles as anyone in the firm. And if you don't meet the criteria, you won't have an opportunity. And so I think it's important, for all organizations to reiterate that fact, because there's definitely some assumptions that people make, Larry, again, which is absolutely not right. And I think, yeah, if you looked at 50 years ago, with affirmative action and some other programs it was a different time. That is no longer the case. That is no longer the case at all. And certainly within the firm, we're incredibly competitive. And that should be true, by the way, I think at a university looking for faculty. What I think should happen is you should do all the heavy lifting of increasing the diversity of the slate of your faculty. And so if you have a faculty of 10 folks looking for one role, ideally you have a very diverse mix of the 10 and let the best person get through the process. And that's how you have to approach it. But I'm going to be really clear that if you have an opportunity to get an opportunity at EY, it's because you earned it, period.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Peter.
Yes, and one of the things that we struggle with when you're talking about faculty hiring is this idea of fit, which I know from my past life as an auditor that happens at professional services firms as well, that we look at candidates who are similar to ourselves, who think the same way that we do. And so set aside the fact, of looking the same or different, it's this idea of fit. And so I see it, quite honestly, in our hiring practices as well. Sometimes it's quite explicit in terms of the type of research or the methods that someone uses. In another case, it's more implicit in that we tend to be attracted to people who are like us. So how do we sort of get around this idea of continuing to hire the same types of people that we always hire, because the people doing the hiring are attracted to people who are just like them?
You're so right. That is always an interesting dilemma when you're hiring folks. So part of it to me starts with the following. It's how are you talked about process earlier. I think taking a hard look at your current process. Larry, you use the phrase, you go to fish in different ponds. I think from a faculty standpoint, same thing. Are you going to the exact same places and getting the same results? Or if you do that, then you have to say, well, what should we do differently to go fish in different ponds, right? First. Second, you have to make sure that the folks conducting the interview and doing the process are aware of things like bias, confirmation bias. You talked fit, I'll call it fit bias, right? They've got to be aware that bias can exist in your recruiting process. And something we use, it's I think it's a simple tool that we've converted to. It's very, very easy. And so we have a PTR approach. So ask yourself the following questions when you're interviewing a candidate. Is this a preference of mine? Is this tradition? Or is this a requirement for the role? Preference, tradition, requirement. So the fit comment is a preference, right? For example, you may say, I'm an extrovert. This person's an extrovert. They're going to do great. Not necessarily the case. By the way, that's your preference. Being an extrovert is probably not a requirement for the role. So ask yourself and kind of litmus test of this preference. Is it a tradition or is it a requirement? Tradition could be very simply, we recruit at the same school for 100 years, and we should continue to recruit and get most of our hires from there. That could be traditionally correct, but may not be a requirement for the role, right? So preference, tradition, requirement, a great test to perform, especially in recruiting. But the education of your recruiters and your interviewers, really important, because I think that's where things break down a lot. To your comment, it's very easy to try to recruit people that look like you or grew up in your same neighborhood. And if you're an extrovert, they're an extrovert, or conversely, if they're an introvert and you're an introvert, you may like them. Focus on the skills, focus on what's needed to fulfill that role. And that is a hard human condition at times to tackle. So you've got to be relentless in your education. You've got to also check your data, because the other side of it is, this is big for me. If you look at your results, I mentioned we had the best year ever, 45% of our hires are minority, but I'm constantly looking at the data. And if I see some blips one way or the other, I'm going to just question what's happening, right? If we have a number of people, if my numbers go from 45% to 25% next year, which it shouldn't, I know I've got a bunch of recruiters on, make sure it doesn't happen. I'm going to understand what happened. Do we not have enough pipeline? Like what went wrong? And you need to make adjustments accordingly. So that's a big one. But preference, tradition, requirement. Ask yourself those questions. That may help you get over that hurdle.
Can you talk about mentoring post-hiring? Young people typically need mentoring.
Yeah, Larry, they do. I alluded earlier and mentioned that was key to me for staying with the firm this long, having mentors who really just, for whatever reason, just took some liking, invested in me, and helped me kind of navigate the waters. And, I was a first generation college student. So working at a firm like EY was all new to me, let alone being in an audit practice, working on major accounts in New York City. It was all very new. And I will tell you, without a series of mentors, there's no way I'm even talking to you guys right now. I'm probably, who knows where I am, but I'm not here. I'm not in this moment. Critical that we mentor people. And then Larry, you probably heard, you and Paquita, there's a next step, I'll call it, is you also need sponsors. What I have learned over the years, and this is true for me as I made it through the ranks, not only did I need mentors to help guide me, to make me better, to give me advice, but ultimately I need a sponsor, someone who was able to help, whether it's push me or from a promotion or pound the table in those closed door meetings that most of us, let's face it, we are not in when talking about careers or potential assignments. But having a mentor and then ultimately some sponsors who pound the table for me, who made sure I got that assignment, or perhaps made sure I was in the promotion, bucket, if you will. So mentors critically important, sponsors are important. We have a number of formal and informal programs at EY because it doesn't just stop with the hiring. And Larry, I think this is where you're getting at. Important, and this is true for faculty, for students who end up at school. It's not enough just to bring them into your organization. It's what do you do to help ensure they're successful, right? And I think this whole differential investing in people also is a part of when they're starting with your organization. It can't end with just recruiting. And I think for many organizations, and I'd say this was true for us when we started our diversity journey, I think there was an assumption if we just go and recruit more women into the firm, diverse talent into the firm, once we recruit them and just kind of let them run, in the firm and do their own thing, they're going to be fine and successful. That is not always the case. And I think what we recognized many, many years ago now is that your environment matters, right? If you start to create an environment where these whoever your people you're recruiting who may be different, if they don't feel like they belong, they're a part of it, they can be successful there, turnover is going to happen, right? People are not going to feel good about where they are and who they are, and they're not going to stay. And so while the recruiting piece is one aspect, our mentoring and sponsorship, but focusing on your environment, like that is critical. And even I'll give an example at the university level. Having students of color in accounting there or in the business school there, if they don't feel like they belong when they're sitting in your classroom, or they can raise their hand and ask questions, or if as a faculty member, you're not calling on an international student because maybe you can't pronounce their name. And there's a lot of things that affect the environment, in this case, the classroom environment. And I think in order for those students, all your students, to flourish, to grow, to be successful, you've got to make sure they feel like they belong and that the environment is ready, that they can all thrive. And so again, it extends from a mentoring, that's one aspect of dealing with your environment. And there's so many other things that are key there as well.
And is this business of mentoring and sponsorship, which I consider critical, a formal process at EY? Do you have people that are designated as mentors?
We do. Of course, we volunteer. So there's a big formal mentoring process, Larry. And also there's, I'll call some informal mentors as well, right? There's a different train of thought. I mean, some people think you can set these mentoring-mentee relationships up in a formal way. And sometimes they work, right? Sometimes they don't. So we have a balance of formal and a lot of informal mentoring, because let's face it, Larry, you and I may connect in a different level. And although you're not part of my formal mentoring group, we may hit it off. We may work on the same engagement, and you may take an interest, and guess what? We're going to establish a mentoring relationship. I think the big thing for us is encouraging mentoring whenever and wherever, in addition to the formalized program. Finally, just on the sponsorship piece, we don't have a formal sponsoring program per se. I think sponsorship, in my opinion, is actually something that needs to be earned, right? If I'm going to pound the table for someone, I have to feel very comfortable that I'm going to give up some political capital when I'm in that room that I talked about. When the staff's not in the room, we're talking about a global assignment, or we're talking about promotion. And if I'm going to sponsor someone, if I'm going to sponsor Larry and I probably need to have a relationship. I've got to have confidence in Larry, because I'm going to give up some political capital in that room. And I got to feel really good about it. So I think the sponsoring piece and mentoring very different that way, Larry, in my opinion. And sponsorship is something that you really have to earn.
You mentioned that you engaged your people advisory group to help look at your environments. And so we did something similar. We engaged one of our student consulting groups to conduct a climate survey. And from that, we learned, as you mentioned, that students expressed that they wanted to feel more comfortable in classes. And so in last August, 15 of our faculty participated in an inclusive pedagogy seminar to think about the curriculum and the materials that we deliver. And we're going to continue to have faculty participate in that. So everyone talks about DEI training and those sorts of things. So we're doing inclusive pedagogy. We had a session on the history of racism. What are the types of things that you're doing at the firm to make your employees aware of what's happening and how to make changes?
Yeah, great question. I love that you're doing that, by the way. I think it's everyone, this, but everyone needs to understand a one-time training course on bias won't cut it. Doesn't do it, right? I think you have to be really consistent, much like you have curriculum in accounting or whatever the major might be. I actually think you need to have a DEI curriculum as well, right? With a series of learning or events or things you're doing to help people change their behavior, because ultimately that's what it's about. So that is great. I know you have more in store. And so I'd say we have, I'll give you a couple examples in the firm. So we have, what we call an inclusion and belonging badge. So in the firm, you can actually do some training and education and get what we call like an EY badge, like a bronze badge in a particular topic or skill. It could be AI, it could be cryptocurrency, additional learning. That's the bottom line. Well, we have an inclusion and belonging badge. And in fact, when we looked at the folks who are getting badge, and this is, the AI badge and the crypto badge, inclusion and belonging was the most popular badge. And it's not required. It's what our people wanted to do and asked for. So that's one example. We have a number of training and development courses. We bring external consultants in We do generally a big celebration of our new managers, senior manager promotees. Pre-COVID, we actually would fly them all down to Disney in Orlando, thousands of them, to celebrate their respective promotion. And we would have a lot of learning and development. We bring in a woman from Harvard who written a book around unconscious bias, and she would present to the groups. So it's consistent and constant learning and development on that front. It can't be a one-time event, because I think that's where a lot of organizations go wrong, in my opinion, more than a one time. And the faculty, I know there are a lot of faculty on, you are so critical in the success around DEI on campus, especially with the students. They look at you, you're standing in front of that classroom, if you will. I would call you and label you an inclusive leader. We're big on inclusive leadership in the firm. You could have all the programs you want, you could have all the wonderful things you talk about, but without leaders who are truly inclusive to reinforce those things, your initiatives won't make it. And I'd say to the faculty, you are, in my opinion, the inclusive leader that will make all the initiatives go from what you're trying to accomplish, because the students see you every day, or just about every day. And frankly, how you bring that classroom along, how inclusive you are, will really, really matter. But consistency, Paquita, to your point, having a curriculum is what we do. We're really thoughtful about our communications, because the big issue to me is the why are you focused on DEI? And I think a lot of organizations fail to articulate that. They just assume people will jump on board because it's the quote unquote right thing to do. I will tell you from years of experience, many people don't jump on because it's the quote unquote right thing to do. You have to have a real business case discussion, and that's that old saying of kind of what's in it for them. So and that's what makes this work hard. Like this work, we've been on this journey for 25 years, Larry, as I mentioned, Paquita, because the work's hard. It's hard to change behavior, right? Things are constantly evolving. It is difficult work, but necessary work, I think, if you want to maximize the benefits of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And speaking of the business case, what have you heard from your clients as a professional services firm? Yeah.
Wow. What's been fascinating this year, I mentioned it a little bit, but post George Floyd, and I think many organizations have, whether it's a time of reckoning or looking at tackling social and racial unrest that exists in the country, many of our clients and organizations have stepped up in a very different way. I mean, certainly many organizations, their respective CEOs, we did as well, issued statements, right? And many of our clients did. I am on more calls and interactions with our clients who are looking to tap into some of the things that we're doing. And, people look at us as being, I'll call it, fairly successful in the DEI space. We've been at it for a long time. We've had a lot of lessons learned, and they're looking to tap into what we're doing. And so I've had more calls this year and interactions with clients and boards, even universities similar to this, so we can just share knowledge and best practices and ideas. So our clients are really focused on it. What I've really seen, even more so this last year, that any new requests for proposals, so new business opportunities, there's a section of questions that are asking the firms like ours, tell me about your DEI strategy, initiatives, programs, representation, right? There's a greater emphasis and focus on the team that we bring forward. How diverse is the UI team, right? How are you serviced around the globe? And so from a business standpoint, wow, it has really picked up. Clients, frankly, are demanding it. I love it, right? I love the fact that they ask those tough questions. And so we have to respond accordingly. And I think it's been interesting to see over the course of the year how many, again, companies, how many universities are focusing differently on this now. And I think we're just at a pivotal moment in DEI space, in my opinion.
I was going to push this a little. Baruch College is recognized as being diverse, but we in this room know that we're not diverse enough. I'm wondering if the processes that you use at EMY and the processes we should be using at Baruch are much different.
No, Larry, if I just focus on recruiting of students for a second, right? You take a look at your admissions process. Who do you have representing you? And I don't know what you do today, but if they're going to certain high schools, right? What high schools are they going to? How are you attracting students? Frankly, what's Baruch's reputation like in different communities? And, being in the heart of the city, right, I would expect that you would have a fair amount of diversity. Larry, to your point, because of where you are in New York, but looking at your processes today, again, your admissions, who's representing you at these high schools, how competitive are you when it comes to whether it's scholarship dollars or really recruiting the students? Because I think a lot of places, and including us, to be honest, sometimes we think if we just show up on the campus or if you show up at a high school because of your reputation, students are automatically going to say yes and decide to join. Not the case. You've got to be really competitive. You've got to demonstrate to these students that you really want them. And then once they visit your campus, what is their experience like? If they had an older sibling that went to Baruch, what would that older sibling tell that younger sibling about their experience in the classroom, on campus, right? So the reputation matters. This climate survey that you alluded to earlier, doing a deep dive into people's experience. That's one thing we do a really great job, trying to understand our people's experience through a lot of different surveys, but you have to be willing to course correct. What I find, in my opinion, I spend a lot of time at universities. Sometimes universities are hard to change, right? You do a great job of research, having data, all that wonderful stuff. But my question is, are you willing to change? And how are you willing to adjust your process or approach, right, to look for a different outcome? And a lot of universities don't do it. So you should use that PTR model on your recruitment, Larry, of students. And that's one example of a way you might be able to change the makeup.
My guess is if I looked at your recruitment team 25 years ago, and I looked at that recruitment team today, I would see an enormous difference.
You sure would.
And that's change.
You sure would. You wouldn't have seen me 25 years ago in recruiting, but you're right. It has clearly changed, but because we were deliberate, right? You have to be deliberate in this space. For those folks who just want to sit idle and think that over time, because demographics are shifting, that will equate to more diverse students on campus. So you might wait 50 years and that'll never happen. The question is, what are you doing to be deliberate and focused on changing the makeup of your student body, if that is a focus? I assume it is. What are you doing to be deliberate to change the makeup of your faculty? All those things really, really matter, and it takes commitment. And to be honest, if you ask me what am I proud of about the firm, our consistency in DEI has been like amazing and unwavering in good and bad times, right? You could have easily said, think about last year when we all went through the pandemic, uncertainty of the market and the marketplace and the economy. We were, in fact, not just unwavering in our commitment, we gave more money, more investments in the community, social justice organizations, focusing on bridging the digital divide for underserved communities as they were navigating COVID and homeschooling. Unwavering in our commitment to diversity. Like that is like, I'm so proud of the firm for doing that. And to be able to be a part of that has like been pretty special to me. So I will continue to run this race really, really hard. I'm really passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've got a teenage daughter who will be a senior in high school. And Larry and Paquita, I do this for her. If she ends up at Baruch, I want her experience at Baruch to be amazing. I don't want her to have to worry about the environment per se, but I want her to focus on academics and being the best that she can be. And if she comes to work for EY one day, same thing. I want her to focus on being an amazing professional, not worried about what potential bias or who's going to say something stupid, if you will, whatever it might be. But I'm focused on the long term because I want to make the world a better place for her. I imagine those of you who have kids or grandkids, I hope that's what you're thinking as well, right? You don't want your grandkid or kid to have to come into an environment or a place where there's discrimination or hate speech or whatever it might be. This is why I run pretty hard in this space. I'll speak to anyone, anybody, to try to share ideas, to try to get you to think differently, because this matters for my daughter's future and for all of our, frankly, kids and grandkids' future.
Ken, how has EY, I should say, used social media to improve your DEI achievements?
Yeah, me, like a lot of organizations we're pretty engaged on, whether it's the Twitter, Facebook, you name it, we're on everything, Instagram. We've got a number of younger people who are posting about their experiences in the firm while they're doing, at a client or a project, but just talking about their experience. So social media is a big part of it. Certainly, I try to issue and talk about things that we're doing programmatically. externally, because social media, as you know, is a way that students absorb and soak information. A lot of us do, by the way. So we're heavily engaged there. Like I said, if you go to ey.com, you can follow us. You can get a real sense of all the initiatives and activities that the firm has going on, from whether it's working in the entrepreneur space or investing in digital divide. And more importantly, is it about serving our clients as well? You can find out. So we're heavily in the social media space.
Related to that, how do you communicate to the public at large what your brand is and how important DEI is to you? What do you think is the one most important thing that you do to communicate this priority?
Yeah, again, I think we are front and center. If you go back, and Kelly Greer, our US CEO, I mean, she has so many messages and communications that speak to various aspects of diversity. I mean, whether it's Pride Month, I mean, you name it, whether it's anti-Asian hate, speaking out against that. I mean, we're pretty active on kind of who we are and what we stand for from a values perspective. And we live our values, and that's how we do it. And I think Kelly and a lot of us are pretty active in, again, LinkedIn, you pick the social media site. We're not afraid to say we're against this or we celebrate that. And I think that is important. And it's not always easy for an organization from a leader perspective to put yourself out there, right? I mean, you think about, if you say you're pro this and you're on social media, you're going to get a number of people who are pro the other thing. Right, and you just have to deal with it. But to me, it's back to who are you and what do you stand for in the way of your values? I mean, being inclusive is part of our value set. I mean, people who demonstrate integrity, respect, teaming, and inclusiveness. That's one of our values. And Kelly, all the way through all the partners, we always preach our values, to live our values. And I think if people disagree with the values, you have to question, should they be in your organization? And maybe they want to look at further opportunities as well.
Before I get Gwen involved, I see her there, and she'll ask some questions on behalf of the audience. I want to ask one more question.
Sure.
Since we all don't get it all right, we never get it all right, can you talk about some of the things that perhaps you wish you hadn't done, that you got wrong, and save us from making the same mistake?
Me personally, Larry, you mean in our DEI?
No, the DEI project. Not you personally, because I wouldn't want you asking me that question.
Because we need another hour for me if I had to cover that. But so here's what I would say to that. I think early on, when we started this in the early 90s, and again, the words changed. The words like diversity, equity, and inclusion, that was not part of the nomenclature back there. When we talked about diversity, it was frankly just how do we focus on women and underrepresented talent. So Black, Latinx, Native American. That was like the extent of our diversity focus. And candidly, we were exclusive of the white guys. I mean, when you think about a lot of diversity initiatives, they were exclusive of the white guys. That we learned that's not the right answer. If you're going to be inclusive, right, you got to be real inclusive. And everyone brings a different aspect of diversity. And so how might you be truly inclusive? And that's a lesson learned that I'd say any organization or school starting it, you've got to really be inclusive. Now, you certainly have to differentially invest, for different groups, but you've got to be inclusive. And I think that's the only way that it will make you work. The second point I would say is communications, Larry, really articulating why this matters to the business or why this matters to the university. Because devoid of that, people don't understand why you're giving time, effort, and resources on this thing called diversity. So those are a couple lessons learned.
Gwen, our audience.
Thank you. We're getting a lot of comments here. Actually, we're getting an unusual number of comments thanking you for the discussion, Ken.
Oh, wonderful.
Some of these questions are quite tough. So are you ready?
No, but ask them anyway, Gwen.
Does EY ever get pushback from clients about a quote unquote minority staff member being assigned to their account, and how do you handle this?
Yeah, that has happened over the years, right? I think as much progress as that we're making, as a firm and as an organization, we and the clients we serve are a microcosm of a lot of different viewpoints and ideas. So yes, we've had some issues in the past. Our position is the following. There's no client bigger than the firm's brand or reputation. So we deal with that accordingly. Actually, we've resigned from a couple of clients over the years because we're not going to tolerate, whether it were comments or the way they treated certain members of our staff. So we're not going to tolerate that. No client, we love our clients, don't get me wrong, but there's no clients bigger than the firm's brand or reputation. So we will tackle and deal with that head on.
Okay, here's another one. How would you describe your vision on DEI for the firm for the next 5 years?
Ooh, that's a great question. For the next 5 years, you look at where we are as a nation. I'll just focus on the US. Let me think about globally, but we're pretty divided right now as a country. I do think that the communications, I think, helping people to have what I'll call real conversations around DEI will be important over the next several years to me, because I think a lot of us are guilty of this. I bet many of you are, right? Zoning and honing in on the same 1 or 2 channels where you get your information from, and making those viewpoints the gospel. I would say diversify your sources of where you're getting information, take a step back from that and really think, does that make sense? So I think communications, Gwen, will be really, really important over the next several years. I think creating the right environment where people can have real conversations. Like, I really believe that conversations are the currency for change, especially in this space, especially at this time where we're so divided as a country. Let's sit down, Gwen, let's sit down and talk about our respective backgrounds and who we are, and learn from me, I'll learn from you. And we may not always agree at the end of the day, but at least I have a different perspective and point of view. It's ultimately, to me, about respecting and appreciating difference. I think we've got some work to do as a nation there, but this ability to have conversations, that we can actually have real conversations and not digging in on this side and that side, and we can't even talk. That's problematic.
From the same person, a follow-up question. What are some of the signs for you to know that visions from the top are well taken by your employees?
Yeah, we right now we're doing a lot of pulse surveys. You mentioned that you do campus climate surveys. We do a lot of pulse surveys. We certainly check things like turnover, and who are we losing groups more than the other. There are a lot of data points that we look to see if things are resonating. And certainly, with social media, Larry mentioned it earlier today, you actually get a good pulse of what your folks are feeling through the social media channels. And so we take a look at a lot of data, a lot of input, and frankly try to gauge, where our folks are, and see what we need to do. But I think as long as you're consistent with your values and what you stand for, right? Everyone's not going to be happy all the time. We know that. And I think you've got to just continue to work at it. But again, this is a tough sledding.
Looking back, Ken, on yours and EY's experience over the years in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, what efforts do you feel have been the most successful, and in what ways were those successful efforts the most noteworthy?
Yeah, I think the messaging, the communications from all of our leaders through, I think, allowing open channels and conversation and discussing from the staff to raise issues and concerns. Communications, I think, have been really, really important. I think tackling the tough issues, Gwen, and communicating when things are going well, communicate that. When things don't go well, conversely, be open and upfront about that. So I think the communications, I could sit here, frankly, and talk about a ton of programs and investments that we've had over the years. And there's been a lot that has been really successful. There's no question. And again, I'm not going to bore you with all the programs. Ultimately, though, this to me gets back to the firm's consistency and unwavering commitment in DEI when times are great and when times are challenging, right? That's a sign of this is really a part of your value set, your strategic priorities. Like, go back some of 2008, remember those, it was a really tough time. We never relented or pushed away from diversity. We always focused, we always invested. I think that's a good sign that things are moving well. And so I'm proud of that, as I mentioned, for the firm.
I'd like to turn now to Paquita, referring to the efforts that Ken feels have had the most impact at EY. Do you feel some of those serve as models and ideas for us in the Zicklin School? Which of them do you think were best candidates for the task force that you and Larry are co-chairing to pursue?
Absolutely. I was definitely taking notes and listening to Ken like everyone else. And I think one of the biggest things that we can do is to communicate, maybe even over communicate what we're doing, the efforts that we're making, and get feedback from faculty and students more frequently. So one of the things I thought about is that this should be a standing agenda item at each of our faculty meetings starting next year. So we can give updates about the progress that we've made, For example, we're going to launch the Baruch BMCC Business Academy this fall, and we want to have our faculty actively involved. We want current and potential students to know about it. So we need to talk about it often because it's going to be one of our primary recruiting tools for underrepresented students. So communication and making this an important part of all of the work that we do through faculty meetings, for example.
Larry, since you retired from Neuberger Berman, you have actively supported causes. Among them are corporate integrity, disclosure of corporate political donations, among many others, especially the Business School of Baruch College. Going forward, do you envision that the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion that you've discussed with Ken and Paquita this morning will continue to be an important focus of your attention? And I assume so, but in what ways?
Well, my focus will continue on DEI, as I mentioned in a previous conversation with Ken. If you're not focused on DEI, you don't belong here, because we've got a whole lot of ground to make up. So for me, it's going to be focus. I'm going to continue my focus on Baruch. I'm interested in corporate political donations because I think they're a source of great evil in the world, but that's a different story. So I will focus, I will concentrate. I'm old, so I have to be realistic and optimize my time. So my time is largely going to be spent in this area at Baruch.
Larry, thank you. There are a number of other questions, but we are short on time, so I want to thank the people who posted them. I want to thank you, Ken. Thank you, Paquita. Thank you, Larry, for a really insightful discussion. These issues are among the most compelling that we in the university are facing now and in the future. I'm delighted to say that our next webinar will be July 13th. It will be on how the COVID-19 pandemic has changed healthcare delivery. Our guests are going to be Dr. Ken Bouyer. He is an internist specializing in pulmonary and critical care medicine and has, during the pandemic, been on the front lines. And joining them will be Professor Alex Mills, who is a professor in our management department for operations management. And Alex is the academic director of our executive MBA in healthcare program. Again, thank you, Ken, Paquita, Larry, for an insightful discussion on a very compelling topic.
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you, Paquita. Ken, you're a prince.
I appreciate you. Right back at you, Larry. Thanks, Paquita. I enjoyed this conversation, guys. Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Bye now.